She moves through the crowd the way someone moves when they cannot afford to be seen. Not slow, not fast, just careful. Shoulder first, then the rest of her sliding into the gaps between bodies before anyone has time to notice there was a gap at all. 12 years of practice will teach a person how to disappear in plain sight. Her eyes are fixed on one thing, not a face, not the crowd pressing in around a man everyone in this town has been talking about for days. Her eyes are fixed on the edge of his robe, the hem, the fringe hanging loose where the fabric ends. She is not going to ask him for anything. She is not going to say his name or fall at his feet, or do any of the things a person is supposed to do when they want help from a rabbi surrounded by a crowd. She has a plan, and the plan requires exactly one thing. Get close enough to touch the edge of that garment and get away before anyone asks who she is. Because if they ask who she is, this ends badly. Not just embarrassing, dangerous. This is not a story about a magic touch, not about persistence, not about luck. We will come back to why in a moment. First, something needs to be said plainly, because the next few minutes only work if you're paying attention to a detail almost every telling of this story skips. In a few seconds, this woman is going to touch Jesus, and Jesus is going to speak a sentence to her. 4 words in most English translations. Your faith has made you well. Made you well. That phrase sounds warm, comforting, a little vague. Maybe the way religious language can get vague, the way well can mean almost anything you want it to mean. But the word sitting underneath made you well in the original Greek is not a soft, vague word. It is a word this gospel writer used dozens of times in dozens of different scenes, and almost none of those other scenes have anything to do with a physical illness at all. That word is going to show up again and again over the next several minutes. A blind man on the side of a road is going to hear it. A grateful stranger from a country nobody trusted is going to hear it. A man who spent his career stealing from his own people is going to hear a version of it spoken about his entire house. By the end, you're going to understand something most readers of this story miss completely. Jesus was never using 2 different words for 2 different kinds of rescue. He was using one word, the same word every time. And that means every healing in this gospel is quietly doing something much bigger than fixing a body. But we are getting ahead of the story. Let us go back to why a woman would spend 12 years learning how to disappear in a crowd. Her sickness had a name in the law, and the name was not kind. For 12 years she had been bleeding. Not the ordinary monthly kind of bleeding every woman in that crowd would have understood and made room for. Hers never stopped. Day after day, month after month, for over a decade, her body would not let her be clean by the standards of the law she had grown up under. That mattered more than a modern reader might expect. Under that law, a woman in her condition was considered ritually unclean, not sinful, not being punished, just by the rules of ceremonial purity, unfit to touch or be touched. Anything she sat on was unclean. Anyone she touched became unclean too, at least for a while until they went through the proper steps to be clean again, which meant for 12 years, she could not risk brushing against a stranger in a crowd. Could not sit at a family meal without someone quietly checking the cushion afterward, could not walk into the synagogue and stand shoulder to shoulder with the rest of the community on a Sabbath morning. The text says she had spent everything she had on physicians, and instead of getting better, she got worse. 12 years of money and hope gone, and the bleeding never stopped. 12 years is not a small number in this story, and it is worth holding on to because in about 90 seconds, another 12 is going to walk directly into this same scene, and the 2 will collide in a way this gospel writer almost certainly placed there on purpose. While this woman is still working her way through the crowd, a man named Jairus has already reached Jesus. He is a synagogue official, someone with a name, a title, a public reputation to protect. And he does something that costs him exactly none of the caution the woman is spending. He falls at Jesus' feet right there in front of everyone and begs, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and lay your hands on her so that she may be healed and live." 2 very different people. One with status falling down in public, asking loudly. One with no status at all easing sideways through a crowd planning to ask nothing out loud at all. And between them, one detail neither of them could have known yet. His daughter is 12 years old. The exact number of years this other woman has been sick. Jesus starts moving toward Jairus' house. The crowd presses in around him thick enough that Mark's gospel says people are literally crushing against him from every side. And somewhere in that crush, a hand reaches out, finds the fringe hanging from the edge of his robe, and closes around it. She does not grab his arm. She does not tap his shoulder. She reaches for the very edge of the garment, the tassel at the hem, the detail on a robe most people in that crowd would never have thought twice about. That detail is not random, and we will come back to exactly why later. For now, all that matters is this. The instant her fingers close around that fringe, something happens that has nothing to do with luck or magic. The bleeding stops. Immediately, the text says, 12 years undone in the space of one touch. And she knows it. Mark says she felt it in her body, felt that whatever had been wrong with her for over a decade was in that instant finished. She should be able to disappear now. That was the plan. Touch, feel it happen, slip back into the crowd before anyone asks a single question. Except Jesus stops walking. He turns right there in the middle of the crush and asks a question that makes absolutely no sense to the people around him. Who touched me? His own followers practically laugh at him. Everyone is touching him. There are people on every side, jostling, pushing, pressing in. Close enough that a question like that sounds almost absurd. But Jesus is not asking about ordinary contact. He knows the difference between a crowd bumping against him and one specific hand reaching for one specific piece of fabric with one specific kind of desperation behind it. He keeps looking, scanning the faces, waiting. And the woman understands in that moment that her plan has failed. There will be no quiet disappearance. She is going to have to be seen. Mark says she came forward fearing and trembling, fully aware of what she had just done. Under the law she had lived under for 12 years, she had just touched a rabbi in public, while ceremonially unclean. She had, by that law's own logic, just made him unclean too, in front of a crowd that included a synagogue official and everyone he had brought with him. She falls down in front of Jesus, the same posture Jairus had used minutes earlier, and she tells him the whole truth, all of it. 12 years. Every physician, every coin spent. The touch, the healing she felt happen inside her own body. The crowd is watching. Jairus is watching his own dying daughter still waiting at home while this delay plays out in public. And Jesus says the sentence, not what you might expect. He does not say you are clean now. He does not say the law no longer applies to you. He does not even lead with anything about her body at all. He calls her daughter, a word he uses for no one else anywhere in this gospel. And then he says the sentence that this entire video has been building toward, the one that sounds simple in English and is doing something much bigger underneath. We are going to slow all the way down on that sentence in a few minutes, once you have heard it land 2 more times in 2 more mouths in 2 completely different situations. Because once you have heard the pattern repeat, you will not be able to read it as just a kind thing. Jesus said to one desperate woman. You will see it for what it actually is. But first, Jairus is still waiting. And while Jesus finishes speaking to this woman, someone arrives from his house with news that changes everything. While Jesus is still speaking to her, someone arrives from Jairus' house. The news is short. Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? Jairus says nothing that Mark records. What is there to say? But Jesus turns to him before he can even absorb it, and speaks 4 words that will sound familiar to anyone who has just watched a woman rebuilt from 12 years of ruin in a single sentence. Do not be afraid. Only believe. He takes Jairus and only a few of his closest followers and walks the rest of the way to the house. Past the mourners already gathered outside, past the noise of professional grief, and into a room where a 12-year-old girl is lying still. He takes her hand. 2 words in her own language kept untranslated in this gospel, like the writer wanted you to hear the actual sound of them. Talitha cum. Little girl, get up. And she does. Mark says she got up immediately and started walking around, and everyone in that room was overwhelmed with amazement. 2 women. 2 lives interrupted by the number 12. One healed in a crowd in public, in broad daylight, forced into visibility she never wanted. one raised in private, behind a closed door with only a handful of witnesses. Different scale, different circumstance, but the same hand, and as you're about to find out, the same word underneath everything Jesus says about both of them. This gospel does not dwell on the moment. It moves on the way a life keeps moving. And so do we. Because the phrase Jesus spoke to that woman on the road is about to come back. Not once, twice more in two very different mouths to two very different kinds of people. And once you have heard it a third time, you will not be able to unhear the pattern. Years pass in the space of a page turn the way they do in these Gospels. Jesus is leaving Jericho now, a large crowd trailing behind him, when a blind beggar sitting by the roadside hears who is passing by. His name is Bartimaeus, and he has nothing left to lose by being loud. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. The crowd tells him to be quiet. People around a famous rabbi tend to do that to manage the noise to protect the schedule. But Bartimaeus does not get quieter. He shouts louder, and Jesus stops walking. Call him here. They bring him over, and Jesus asks a question that sounds almost too simple for the moment. What do you want me to do for you? Rabbi, I want to see. And Jesus answers him with a sentence that should sound familiar by now because it is word for word in the original language, the exact same sentence spoken to a bleeding woman on a different road in a different town to a completely different kind of suffering. Go your way. Your faith has made you well. Same words, same verb. A blind beggar and a woman who had spent everything she owned on 12 years of failed cures, and Jesus responds to both of them with the identical Greek sentence. That is not a coincidence of translation. That is a pattern this gospel writer built on purpose. And if you have noticed it too, you're exactly where this video wants you. If a pattern like this is starting to change how you read these stories, that is worth sticking around for because it only gets clearer from here. Hit subscribe if you want the rest of it, and drop a comment with the moment in Scripture that has ever hit you the same way this one just hit Bartimaeus. The pattern shows up a third time, and this time it comes from someone nobody in that culture expected grace to reach. 10 men with leprosy call out to Jesus from a distance, kept there by the same kind of ceremonial law that had once made the bleeding woman untouchable. Jesus tells them to go show themselves to the priests, the required step for anyone certified clean of the disease, and as they go, all 10 are healed. Only one comes back. And Luke's gospel makes a point of telling you exactly who he was. A Samaritan. A foreigner by the standards of the crowd around Jesus. Someone from a people most of Israel considered outside the covenant altogether. He comes back, praising God at the top of his voice, falls at Jesus' feet, and thanks him. Jesus' response is the same sentence a third time. Rise and go your way. Your faith has made you well. Now stop and actually look at what has just happened 3 times in a row. A desperate woman out of options reaching for a hem in a crowd. A blind beggar shouting until someone finally listened. A foreigner, the kind of person religious Israel had spent generations learning to keep at arm's length. 3 completely different people. 3 completely different situations, and Jesus answers every one of them with the exact same Greek sentence. Here is the word underneath that sentence. In Greek, it is sozo. And it does not have a single narrow meaning the way healed does in English. Sozo means to save, to rescue, to make whole, to deliver from danger, to restore a life that was on its way to being lost. It is the same word this gospel writer uses for physical healing, and it is the same word he uses everywhere else in the New Testament for salvation. Not a related word, not a cousin word borrowed for a nice metaphor. The same word, which means every single time Jesus says, "Your faith has made you well" in these stories, the sentence sitting underneath the English translation is closer to "your faith has saved you." Not saved from an illness as a separate category from saved from sin. Saved full stop, the same rescue, playing out in a body instead of a soul this time, as a kind of preview of the very thing Jesus came to do at the deepest level. That is the reveal this whole video has been walking toward since the first minute. But there is one more scene left, and it takes that revealed word and turns it from a verb into a noun, spoken over an entire household. His name is Zacchaeus, and almost nobody in Jericho has a kind word for him. He is a chief tax collector, which means he has spent his career taking money from his own people and handing it to Rome, and by every account taking more than his share along the way. He is also short, which matters to the story for a very practical reason. When Jesus comes through Jericho with a crowd around him, Zacchaeus cannot see over anyone, so he does something a grown man of his social standing had no business doing. He runs ahead and climbs a tree. Jesus stops beneath it, looks up, and says his name. Not tax collector, not sinner, which is what the crowd is already muttering. His name. Zacchaeus, come down. I must stay at your house today. The crowd grumbles. Of all the houses in Jericho, this is the one Jesus chooses. But something happens in Zacchaeus that afternoon that the text lets you watch in real time. He stands up and announces unprompted that he will give half of everything he owns to the poor and pay back 4 times over anyone he has cheated. And Jesus says the sentence that closes the loop this entire video has been building toward. Today, salvation has come to this house. Not healing, salvation. The noun form of the exact same word, sozo, turned into soteria, sitting in the same family as every made you well spoken to a woman on a road, a blind man by the highway, and a foreigner who turned back to say thank you. What was a verb applied to broken bodies is now a noun applied to an entire household restored, not from disease, but from a life spent taking instead of giving. Same word. Every time. And now you can hear it. If that connection just reframed something for you, this is usually the part where a video like this asks you to stick around. So consider it asked, and let us go back to where we started, because there is one detail from the very beginning that is about to matter more than it did the first time you heard it. Go back to the crowd, back to the hand reaching for the edge of a robe, and listen now to the whole sentence this video has been holding back since the first minute. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. That is what he actually said to her, the same word already sitting inside it that you have now heard 3 more times in 3 more mouths. She did not grab his sleeve. She did not reach for the body of the garment at all. She reached specifically for the fringe, the tassel hanging from the hem, the small detail woven into the edge of the fabric that most people in that crowd would never have looked at twice. That detail was not random. In the culture Jesus lived in, a tassel like that at the corner of a garment was tied to the commandments themselves. A small physical reminder worn on the body meant to call to mind the instructions God had given his people to live by. She did not reach for cloth. She reached for the one part of the garment that stood visibly for obedience to God. A woman the law called unclean, reaching through a crowd for the one thread on that robe that represented the law's own commandments. And what she got back was not a lecture about ritual purity. It was a word that meant she had been saved. That is the whole shape of this story, and it is the whole shape of the sentence Jesus keeps repeating across all 4 of these scenes. She still had to reach. Bartimaeus still had to shout until someone finally heard him. The Samaritan still had to turn around and come back. Faith always looks like an action, a hand moving, a voice raised, feet turning back the way they came. But the word that met every single one of those actions was never well done. It was saved. A gift, not a wage. Grace meeting the reach, not rewarding it. That is not a side note to this story. That is the whole of it, sitting in one line most people read past every single time. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is the gift of God, not of works, so that no one can boast. She did not earn 12 years of ruin undone. She reached for it, and grace was already there to meet her hand before it even landed. Every single person in this story reached for something. A hymn, a voice loud enough to be heard over a crowd trying to silence it. A decision to turn back and say thank you instead of walking on with everyone else. None of them healed themselves. None of them saved themselves. They reached, and the same word met every one of them. Your faith has made you well. Your faith has saved you. Same sentence. Same word sitting underneath every one of these stories in a language most of us will never read them in. A woman who spent everything she had. A man who refused to stay quiet. A foreigner who came back to say thank you. A tax collector everyone else had already written off. If this is the story you needed to hear reaching for something today, you already know what to do next. Reach anyway. Which one of these 4 hit you hardest? The woman, the beggar, the Samaritan, or the man in the tree? Tell me in the comments, because the word never changed. Only the hand did.